Is the new DC Multiverse Connor Kent too scrawny? Is he worth the $30 McFarlane Collector Edition price tag? How would some head swaps look? Stick around and find out. Starting with the packaging, we've got our extra wide, extra shiny McFarlane Collector Edition box. On the spine we see this Connor Kent is from Teen Titans, and that it's number 15 in the Collector Edition series. On the back we get some pretty cool artwork of Connor. For those searching for Superboy in stores, here's the UPC, and for packaging, Connor gets 5 points. Moving on to presentation, and Connor stands at 7 1/8 inches, or about 18 centimeters. Connor here is a slightly older and more mature version of this guy. Is actually the result of a cloning experiment combining the DNA of Superman and Lex Luthor. So, you know, pretty much Nuclear Man from Superman 4. Without the Lee press on nails, of course. Personally, this version of Connor is my favorite iteration of Superboy, and in my humble opinion, should have become Superman during the Future's End story instead of aging up John. That's just my 2 cents, but sound off in the comments and let me know what you think. As for the figure, it's mostly reuse of Todd McFarlane from the recent Spawn 2-pack, though it's worth noting the pants and feet were reused from a figure before that. Specifically, they come from Constantine. They've just been given a new knee piece without a hole. There is still a slight tear on this side though. The biggest criticism I've seen of this figure is that it was built off of a fairly scrawny body and that Connor should be a bit bulkier. Obviously, you're going to be able to find artwork from the comics to support either opinion, but I'd be a liar if I said I didn't think it'd be a bit more accurate if he was a little bigger. I am happy that the symbol is crisp and vibrant, and overall I do like this head sculpt. Even though he's only half Superman, you still can see the shadow of the Man of Steel in there, and although it's subtle, there's a slight smile that I do appreciate. If anything, this figure makes me want to see what McFarlane could do with a Tom Welling Clark, docking him ever so slightly for his lack of girth, and for presentation I'm giving Connor Kent 4 points. If you're enjoying this video so far, do me a favor and give it a like. Moving on to Poseability, and this isn't exactly Connor's strongest suit, but it's not exactly bad either. From the top, and Connor's head is on a dumbbell joint. Unfortunately, he cannot look up whatsoever, which for a flying character is a real bummer. He can look down a bit though. A little bit of tilt, but enough. And of course all the way around. Moving on down, and Connor can raise his arms 90 degrees. He's got extra range thanks to a very well executed rotator cuff and complete rotation. Moving down, and the bicep swivel has been very nicely hidden by this t-shirt cuff. He's got double jointed elbows and they are a perfect bend. And then at the ends of the arms are very well integrated McFarlane style wrist balls that can swivel and hinge either up and down or side to side. Moving to the middle, and Connor has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. Utilizing both, he can arch back this far, which is what I do want to see in a flying character, but again, without being able to look up, that does hinder him a bit. He can hunch forward this far, however, which, while maybe not super, is still better than usual. Additionally, that diaphragm gives him a great amount of tilt and twist at both the diaphragm and the waist. Below the waist, and Connor has the typical McFarlane hips. They can only kick about 45 degrees, but they do get a perfect split. Additionally, the twist in the hip is really good this time around. Moving down, Connor has double jointed knees with a nice deep bend, toe articulation, and ankles we kinda have to talk about. Mainly because they are really loose this time around, and as such I have a very hard time getting him to stand. That said, they can swivel, oh boy can they hinge, and they can pivot. Overall, the articulation on this figure is good, but the loose ankles and especially limited head range really set him back, so for Poseability, I'm giving Connor 4 points. Moving on to Playability, and whatever criticisms I had of Poseability are more than made up for here. Naturally, we have a trading card. If you want to read what it says, pause here. We also get our tried and true DC Multiverse figure stand. Interestingly enough though, they did not paint the logo silver this time. That said, McFarlane did give us a flight stand, and they definitely painted that logo big and bold, but in a surprise twist, they did not give us a trading card stand. Instead, they gave us this really cool crater effects piece. It does have pegs in it, so you can use it as a third figure stand in the box. Most importantly though, you can use it for a really cool superhero landing. Speaking of punching things, Connor comes preloaded with a pair of fists. That's not all though. He also comes with this alternate pointing hand and an alternate accessory holding, by which I mean trigger, left hand. For real though, why is it always the left hand? Now I already said in presentation that I really like this kind smiling head, But he also comes with his alternate gritting teeth head for fighting, or as I like to call it, the angry Norm Macdonald. Not only that, but there's even an additional bald head for when he's giving in to his Lex half. Unfortunately, this head can't look up either. An extra head for a DC Multiverse figure is practically unheard of, but two? That's amazing. I'm not going to pretend that a lot of this wasn't simply made possible by reuse, but it doesn't change the fact that there's still a lot more value in this box than we've seen from the last few collector edition releases. As well packed as he is though, playability is also about how well your figure plays with others. Starting with his fellow Titans, and here we have Raven, and fellow collector edition Starfire. Next up is Donna Troy. Here we have Arsenal, previously known as Red Arrow, Page Puncher's Aqualad, and the movie version of Jaime Reyes' Blue Beetle. For a couple of Robins, and here's Damian and Tim Drake. For a couple of Nightwings, and here's the Better Than Batman and Titans Wave versions. For a couple of Speedsters, and here's Impulse and Kid Flash. For another member of the Superman family, and here's the Target exclusive Supergirl. That said, for a couple of versions of Superman himself, and here's Hush with Action Comics 1000. But for this baby's other daddy, and here's Lex Luthor in his power suit. And lastly, for the perennial villain of all Teen Titans, here we have Rebirth and Arkham Origins versions of Deathstroke. For a rail-to-scale comparison, and here's Superboy with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here he is with Stealth Iron Man. Of course, I know some of you just can't wait to see some head swaps. First things first, and it seems only appropriate to bring out this Con-El. Not gonna lie, this looks a lot better than I expected. The hairstyle isn't quite right for 90s Superboy, but I do still like this head better. And if you wanted to do some customizing, I think that there is something there. Other way around, and I don't really like this as much. The head sits too high and the skin tones don't match. And there's just a general smugness to it that just doesn't feel quite right for this version of Connor. Con-El Superboy brings us to Superboy Prime. Generally speaking, this is the head I see people use when they make customs of Connor. The skin tones don't match and it does suffer from that side eye, but this is a more Superman leaning head, so it does work. Other way around, and this might just be too kind and gentle for my taste, there is also that lack of Superman hair, but I do think there is something here, and the angry option really does add something. For one that I'm very curious about, and here we have DC Classic Superman. I don't have this pegged in because if I did, it would sit too low, but overall this isn't too bad. Other way around, in this head sits a bit too high, and unfortunately the skin tones don't match, but if you feel inspired, well, there you go. That said, I think what some of you might even be more curious about are these oven mitt hands. The pegs are thicker on Superman, so you can't just slide the Connor hands over them. You could try to replace the whole joint, but as you can see, the classic peg is too big for that too. If you were willing to sacrifice some articulation, you could always glue them in place, and if you did, they would scale pretty well. Lastly, and here we have John Kent Superman. Plugging the head in all the way, and it sits way too short, but just sitting up there, we can already see this is a much more pleasant head sculpt for John. Obviously the hairstyle is wrong, but the personality shines through. Or the anger, if that's the way you want to go. Other way around, and this obviously sits too high. The funny thing is I don't actually mind this as much on Connor as I do on John. Between the head swap potential and especially the accessories, for playability, I'm giving Connor 5 points. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. I found mine on shelves at Target where he retails for $29.99. Admittedly, I've been pretty nonplussed by the last couple of collector editions I've looked at, but this one's really turned me around. Granted, the last couple of Marvel Legends I've looked at has really spoiled me for $5 less, but these are larger scale figures, and of course a lot of the value in this box was only made possible by reuse. Still, this is the first time in a while that I have felt like I got my money's worth out of a collector's edition. For price, I'm giving Connor 5 points, averaging out to a grand total of 4.6 out of 5. For more Superman videos, check out one of these. Until next time, play nice and have fun.